In this video, you will learn what it means to serve in the harsh Arctic, whether the Novaya Zemlya archipelago is still used for modern political repression, and what it is like to share your service territory with the true masters of the Arctic, polar bears, who have no qualms about stealing food right out of the soldiers' mess hall. A little background. The Novaya Zemlya archipelago is one of the harshest and most mysterious places on our planet, located in the cold waters of the Arctic Ocean. Its geographical location has always given it special significance. Far beyond the Arctic Circle, surrounded by ice and stormy seas, it was like a natural fortress, separated from the rest of the world. The archipelago was probably discovered as early as the 12th century by our Pomor ancestors, and even then became an object of interest for sailors, explorers, and later scientists and the military. Over the following centuries, Novaya Zemlya attracted attention as a mysterious frontier where the forces of nature and human ambition converged. In the 20th century, the archipelago's importance increased dramatically. In 1939, by order of the Soviet Union government, large-scale construction began on Novaya Zemlya. Military garrisons, warehouses, industrial enterprises, and transport infrastructure were built here. The work was carried out in inhuman conditions: frost, polar night, and icy winds. The main workforce consisted of military builders and Gulag prisoners, who were sent to the archipelago by the thousands. In a short period of time, the first full-fledged military and industrial facilities were built among the desert rocks and permafrost. The year 1954 was a key moment in the history of the archipelago. It was then that Novaya Zemlya officially became the Soviet Union's main nuclear weapons testing site, replacing the Semipalatinsk test site. Here, in conditions of isolation and harsh nature, a unique infrastructure was created for the preparation and conduct of explosions of colossal power. From the 1950s to the 1990s, 132 nuclear tests were conducted on the archipelago, including underground, atmospheric, and underwater tests. Each of them not only tested the power of the Soviet arsenal, but also turned Novaya Zemlya into a symbol of the nuclear age. The most sensational and terrifying event took place in 1961. That was when the most powerful thermonuclear bomb in human history, the N602, better known as the Tsar Bomba, was tested here. Something unimaginable happened on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. 94% of the total power of all nuclear tests ever conducted on the planet was produced here. Each of these tests left a mark not only on history but also on the surrounding nature. Explosions of colossal power turned rocks into dust, changed the landscape, and created huge craters, some of which still gaping among the glaciers today, reminding us of the grandeur and danger of the nuclear age. That is why Novaya Zemlya has a special status today, a closed administrative territorial formation, CATF. It is impossible to get here freely. A special permit from the Ministry of Defense is required, and only a few civilians are given this opportunity. The population of the archipelago today is small, about 3,500 people, and consists almost exclusively of military personnel, defense personnel, and their families. There are no tourists here, and the rare visitors are either builders or researchers working on specific tasks. Life on the archipelago is completely subordinate to the military. Everything around reminds you that this is a territory of special strategic importance. At present, Novaya Zemlya is the Russian Federation's central testing ground, where trials of the latest weapons continue, though no longer nuclear, but mainly high-precision and climate-related. The archipelago consists of two large islands, north and south. The northern island is almost completely covered with glaciers, rocks, and Arctic deserts, where pristine, harsh beauty reigns. The southern island is a little more lively. It is home to military towns, infrastructure, and rare areas with tundra vegetation. The nature of Novaya Zemlya is striking. Huge glaciers stretching into the sea, endless snowfields, sheer cliffs, and the constant sound of Arctic winds create images of incredible power and, at the same time, loneliness. Many who served here fondly remember these landscapes years later, the northern lights flashing over the white expanses, polar nights, when the whole world is plunged into darkness and only the stars and rare lights of the outposts remind us of civilization, polar bears roaming freely near military garrisons, and herds of reindeer making their way across the tundra. The climate here is truly unforgiving. The Arctic winter lasts almost all year round. Temperatures can drop to -40 degrees Celsius, and wind gusts can reach speeds of up to 50 meters per second. They mainly recruit people from the Arkhangelsk region and other northern regions of Russia to Novaya Zemlya. This is no coincidence. The military tries to select young people whose bodies are already accustomed to the harsh climate of the far north. For those born in the central or southern regions, adaptation is more difficult. Sharp temperature changes, constant wind, polar night, and vitamin deficiency become a serious challenge. Northerners, on the other hand, have been hardened by the cold since childhood and therefore find it easier to endure Arctic conditions. The composition of the Novaya Zemlya garrison is diverse. It includes units of the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense, units of the 45th Air Force Army, as well as 2 anti-aircraft missile regiments responsible for protecting the airspace and the security of strategic facilities. Going into more detail, Military Unit No. 77510 serves as the main headquarters and is located in the village of Belushia Guba, which is the main and, in fact, the only large settlement in the archipelago. The local infrastructure is also located there: a school for military children, a club, a store, a hospital, and even a small museum telling the history of Novaya Zemlya. In addition, there is Military Unit No. 01515, which is responsible for the main activities of the test site related to weapons testing and training exercises. There is also a certain 66th unit, where RMO units, 2 security companies, and several separate platoons performing special tasks are stationed. Of course, it is impossible to name all the units stationed on the archipelago. Some of the information is classified. But one thing is certain: people from a wide variety of professions are needed here. Not only combat units are in demand on Novaya Zemlya, but also technical and economic specialists. Among the conscripts are bulldozer operators, cooks, mechanics drivers, signalmen, truck drivers, wheel repair and vulcanization specialists, sappers, and even film mechanics. All of them ensure the functioning of the garrison. Among the narrow specialists working at the central training ground, one can find nuclear physicists, power engineers, and chemists. They are the ones who control radiation safety, take measurements, and maintain reactors and experimental installations. During the Soviet era, there was even a special platoon for fishing and hunting. Its task was to provide the garrison with fresh food on site. Soldiers fished in the Barents Sea and hunted reindeer, which were then delivered to local kitchens. This partially compensated for the difficulties of supplying food by sea and air. As for the radiation background, contrary to popular myths, it is quite normal in the archipelago, with the exception of a few areas where the most powerful tests were conducted in the mid-20th century. These areas have long been closed and fenced off, and neither military personnel nor civilians are allowed to enter them. In the rest of the archipelago, fish and meat can be eaten without fear. All products are inspected. Just over 100 recruits are drafted to Novaya Zemlya at a time. Service here is generally not much different from service on the mainland, but there are important features related to the climate and isolation. The first week of basic military training is spent not only on drill and studying regulations, but also on acclimatization. Soldiers are taught the rules of conduct in the far north: how to dress in severe frosts, how to protect their faces and hands from frostbite, and how to behave during the polar night so as not to lose track of time and fall into depression. Special attention is paid to safety when encountering polar bears, which are full-fledged neighbors of the garrison. Then the soldiers begin their long and, at first glance, endless workdays. I think you can guess that the Arctic winter is not only cold and dark, but also a real paradise for endless kantiki, or work uniforms. Here, on Novaya Zemlya, such work becomes an integral part of service and often turns out to be much more exhausting than drill or training exercises. The local snowdrifts are a special story. Snow here is not just precipitation, but a real force of nature. In a matter of hours, literally before your eyes, it can turn from a neat blanket into a 4-meter wall, and sometimes into a 7-meter problem that must be shoveled by hand. Winds blowing at speeds of up to 40 to 50 meters per second easily create drifts that are impossible to clear with machinery, leaving only manual labor. In addition to clearing the territory of the military unit itself, conscripts are also responsible for clearing snow from the entire military town. This means that administrative buildings, warehouses, headquarters, and even social facilities such as kindergartens and schools for the children of officers and contract soldiers must be dug out of the snow. Imagine this: it's 40 degrees below zero, it's nighttime, and a whole company of soldiers is digging out the entrance to a kindergarten so that teachers and children can get there in the morning. But snow is far from the only concern. On Novaya Zemlya, there is always work for everyone. Barracks need to be repaired, as they wear out very quickly in conditions of constant moisture, frost, and hurricane-force winds. It is necessary to maintain the equipment, which is not just a convenience here, but a means of survival. The performance of combat missions, as well as basic heating in the barracks and access to food supplies, directly depend on the serviceability of bulldozers, all-terrain vehicles, and generators. Added to this are constant loading and unloading operations. Trucks, planes, and ships carrying food, fuel, and building materials arrive at the archipelago irregularly and often at the most inconvenient times. It often happens that a ship approaches the pier at midnight or even at 2 in the morning, and the entire unit, from soldiers to officers, lines up in a chain and unloads boxes, bags, barrels, and containers until morning. There is no such thing as working hours here. When equipment or a ship arrives, it means working non-stop until everything is unloaded. And that's not even the hardest part. Some of the especially lucky ones, as the soldiers say ironically, may be fortunate enough to be sent to serve even further away, to the Severny Peninsula, where the climate is even harsher than in Belushia Guba or Rogachevo. The winds there are so strong that even equipment is sometimes powerless, and the cold easily penetrates even the warmest pea coats. But the worst thing there is not even the cold and snow, but complete isolation from the outside world. No internet, no familiar phones or letters. All communication with the mainland is carried out via a special military telephone, which first connects the soldier to Belushia Guba and only then to the mainland. The queue for a call is huge, and conversations last only a few minutes. Telling your parents or girlfriend that you are alive and well is already a luxury. However, it is worth noting that service in the northern part of the archipelago is not for everyone. Particularly impressionable or psychologically unstable soldiers can often refuse to be sent there, and this is not a whim, but a precautionary measure. Before being sent to the harshest conditions, everyone undergoes mandatory psychological tests and interviews. Not only physical endurance is tested, but also stress resistance and the ability to remain calm in conditions of complete isolation and polar night. After all, in a place where the sun is not visible for several months in a row, and there is only ice, wind, and endless snowdrifts around, an unprepared person can simply break down. Those who pass the tests and are accepted into service are provided with relatively comfortable living conditions. The barracks here are divided into cabins, which allows for at least a little sense of personal space. Soldiers have access to washing machines and showers, but most often they can only use them after lights out, when all work is finished. This creates additional difficulties. The queue for the shower can stretch late into the night, and sleep is already in short supply. Single military personnel usually live in dormitories with 3 or 4 people per room, which is quite acceptable by Army standards. Military families are more fortunate. They are provided with separate apartments and places for their children in kindergartens. Moreover, there are 2 of them on the archipelago, which is a real luxury by local standards. But it is important to understand that even officers and contract soldiers, despite having apartments, are required to strictly adhere to the rules. The rules are enforced equally for everyone. Dirty dishes, an unmade bed, or a messy room can result in punishment, whether you are a conscript or a captain. I was particularly surprised by the fact that the pay for conscripts on Novaya Zemlya is no different from that on the mainland. It is the same paltry 2,000 rubles per month. But the difference is that the prices for food and the simplest things are several times higher here. This creates a paradoxical situation. This money is not even enough for cigarettes, which are a real rarity in the northern part of the archipelago. Tobacco is becoming almost more valuable than gold. Alcohol is a separate story. It can only be legally purchased in 2 places, in Belushia Guba, and even there the selection is limited. But, as is often the case in the army, soldiers and officers find ways around this. According to locals, homemade spirits diluted with water are still available, and this has long been an unspoken tradition for those who want to warm up in harsh conditions. The salary situation is further exacerbated by the fact that payments are not always made regularly. Sometimes soldiers do not see their money for several months in a row. Delays can be as long as 3 to 4 months. This, of course, demoralizes them and greatly affects their morale. Contract soldiers do not have it any easier. Even though they earn dozens of times more than conscripts, their starting salary on the third pay scale is only 25 to 30,000 rubles. Considering that prices on the island are several times higher, this money does not go very far. However, despite all the difficulties of serving in the harsh Arctic archipelago, there is one significant incentive that keeps many military personnel here for years. We are talking about the so-called Northern Allowances. The system is simple and works on a cumulative basis. For each year of service on Novaya Zemlya, 20% is added to your salary. It may seem like a trifle, but with long service, it turns into a substantial amount. For example, after 5 years of continuous service, your salary doubles. That is, you get a 100% increase to your base salary. I know of a case where a warrant officer with significant experience and a high level of expertise earned about 180,000 rubles a month on Novaya Zemlya. This is very good money for military service, especially considering that on the mainland, such an amount was, to put it mildly, unimaginable for officers and warrant officers. According to those who served there, the food situation is generally quite good. At least, none of my informants complained of outright hunger or a constant shortage of food. The army knows how to organize supplies, and soldiers are always fed hot soup and porridge. But, as is often the case in the army, there are some funny things here. For example, closer to spring, when the main supplies are running out, they have to open the ancient freezer vaults. Soldiers can be fed deep frozen meat that has been lying there for decades. According to the recollections of those who served, meat from the 1950s and 1960s, carefully preserved and frozen, sometimes ended up on the table. And even though it didn't taste any different, the very fact that you were eating a product that was more than half a century old caused a real culture shock for many. Milk caused no less bewilderment. It was most often delivered at least a month past its expiration date, and the soldiers said ironically, "It'll go sour at -40 anyway, so what's the difference?" It should be noted that in the northern part of the archipelago, the food is sometimes even better than in the garrisons on the mainland. The reason is simple. Many contract soldiers are sent here, and they try to bring in more supplies and a variety of products for them to somehow compensate for the harsh conditions of service. Therefore, conscripts often received tastier rations for free than their peers in regular garrisons. If it happened that the food was running out, the situation was resolved as quickly as possible. At such moments, planes and ships with food arrived in a matter of hours. The army never left the garrison to starve. But unloading these products is a different story. I have already described how this happened. The entire personnel, regardless of rank and position, went out into the snow and wind to carry boxes, bags, and containers with food. Sometimes this happened late at night or early in the morning, and no one had the right to refuse. And, of course, as is typical in such situations, some of the food mysteriously disappeared during unloading. Some ended up in the pockets of contract soldiers, and some disappeared right into the mouths of conscripts. In addition to the standard duties familiar to any army, kitchen duty, cleaning the territory, guard duty, service on Novaya Zemlya has its own specific features. Due to a chronic shortage of personnel, conscripts here have to take up even those posts that in ordinary units are reserved only for contract soldiers. For example, they often perform the duties of assistants to the duty officer, as well as being assigned to the mess hall, where they are required not only to help distribute food or clear tables, but also to do real slave labor, washing mountains of dishes, endless pots, pans, and kettles. After such shifts, their hands literally cannot bend from the hot water and detergents, and the fatigue is felt more strongly than after a whole day in the snow with a shovel. Another problem for the military personnel of Novaya Zemlya is the huge distances between various infrastructure facilities. It would seem, what's a 30 to 40-minute walk to the dining room or bathhouse? On the mainland, this would seem quite tolerable, even useful for a warm-up. But in the Arctic, any movement outside can turn into a real test of survival. Strong winds, temperatures as low as -40 degrees, and stinging snow that gets into your eyes and nose make even the simplest journey feel like a forced march. There is one instructive story that veteran soldiers still remember. One day, the unit went to the mess hall for a meal. It seemed like a routine trip, but a severe blizzard broke out outside. Normally, in such conditions, leaving the barracks without equipment is strictly prohibited, because visibility drops to zero and the risk of getting lost or frostbitten becomes deadly. However, an order is an order, and the unit went out anyway. Contract soldiers and officers, who had prepared for such conditions in advance, bought ski goggles and therefore did not experience any particular problems. But the conscripts had nothing but balaclavas. The wind and snow hit their faces with such force that one of the guys simply lost his sight. Snow got into his eyes, they stuck together and swelled up, and the soldier had to go to the hospital. For him, it ended in temporary loss of vision and long treatment. However, the Arctic is treacherous. It can not only maim, but also save lives in the most unexpected ways. During routine exercises, an incident occurred that under other circumstances would certainly have ended in tragedy. One of the conscripts ended up under the wheels of a BRDM, a heavy armored vehicle. It would seem that the outcome was obvious. But a miracle happened. The soldier not only survived, but got away with only a dislocated leg. He was saved by the fact that he literally sank into the loose snow, and his helmet and bulletproof vest took the brunt of the impact. The vehicle ran over him, but thanks to the depth of the snowdrift and the cushioning effect of the snow, the soldier survived. Unfortunately, not all stories on Novaya Zemlya end so happily. The North does not forgive mistakes. There are plenty of trials on Novaya Zemlya, and the harsh climate is only half the trouble. There have been many cases where military personnel or local residents went out in a blizzard, lost their bearings in the white haze, and never returned. Sometimes, however, people were found, but with serious consequences, frostbitten limbs that had to be amputated. The Arctic is unforgiving, and it quickly punishes any carelessness. But there is another, no less formidable danger on the archipelago: polar bears. The very same Umki from Soviet cartoons, which we are used to imagining as cute and good-natured, are in fact ruthless predators. An adult bear can weigh up to a ton, and its strength and endurance leave a person no chance in an open fight. Usually, people are of no particular interest to them. The white predator's diet consists of walruses, seals, and other high-calorie prey. Sometimes they feed at local landfills, where food scraps can always be found. Despite this, there have been cases of attacks on humans in the history of the archipelago, and the consequences of such encounters are almost always tragic. On October 24, 2007, a tragedy occurred. Just a few days before his retirement, Colonel Sergei Borisovich Botvinkin was killed in a polar bear attack. This story was discussed at length in military circles as an example of why one cannot relax here for a single minute. And on July 11, 2020, Ivan Mizin, an employee of the Russian Arctic National Park, fell victim to a sudden attack. The bear literally crept up silently and lightning fast, bit him on the head, and dragged him along the road. According to the victim himself, he did not even have time to see the beast. Fortunately, his comrades with loaded guns were nearby, and they saved his life by driving the predator away. It is important to understand that bears here are not solitary animals. Sometimes whole groups of 10 to 12 individuals come to military settlements or research bases, and their appearance can completely paralyze the life of the garrison. Training exercises are postponed, equipment stands idle, and the daily routine goes out the window. Even a simple trip to the dining hall can become a deadly trap. Therefore, strict rules exist to ensure safety on Novaya Zemlya. It is strictly forbidden to throw food waste into the street. The slightest smell can attract bears. There are many dogs running around the military town. They are the first to smell the approach of a beast and start barking. Observers are on duty at special posts, monitoring the surroundings and immediately reporting to the unit commander if uninvited guests appear. The commander, in turn, sounds the alarm and informs residents which areas are currently dangerous to travel in. Since polar bears have poor eyesight but an incredibly keen sense of smell, there are several strict rules of conduct when encountering this predator. Instructors on Novaya Zemlya constantly remind people, if you encounter a bear, do not panic under any circumstances. The first thing to do is to throw something with a strong smell onto the snow, such as a glove soaked in sweat. This will distract the animal. It will stop, sniff the find, and possibly become interested in it instead of you. After that, do not run away and, especially, do not make any sudden movements. Soldiers are strictly instructed not to become prey. Instead, take slow steps backward, 15 to 20 steps, while keeping the predator in your field of vision. At the same time, you should carefully examine the area to find the nearest shelter in advance, a trench, dugout, vehicle, or at least a canopy. When you increase the distance, you can throw a second glove or other item of clothing. This will buy you a little more time. All this seems trivial, but in the Arctic, any mistake can cost you your life. Here, you truly understand that the phrase, "the rules are written in blood," is not just a pretty saying. The rules exist not for the sake of formality. They have been developed through bitter experience and are therefore mandatory. Due to the extreme climate, full-scale training exercises and shooting practice are rare here. But when a shooting range is designated, safety is taken to the absolute maximum. Motion detectors are installed along the perimeter, and technical service and security units are on duty to spot approaching bears or other unexpected guests in time. There have been many cases when animals appeared right on the firing range, and it was strict precautions that saved lives. Leaving Novaya Zemlya is also not as easy as it seems. This can only be done by plane or ship, which means that soldiers and officers here are literally dependent on the weather. If there is a blizzard, snowstorm, or storm, flights and ship departures are postponed. And then the guys who have already packed their things and are preparing for discharge may be stuck on the archipelago for another 2 or even 3 weeks. Contract soldiers and officers have it even harder. The trip to the mainland for vacation is paid for out of their own pockets, and it costs a lot, about 60,000 rubles one way. For many, this amount is a serious blow to the family budget, but there is no choice. The Arctic dictates its own rules. The territory of the archipelago itself is a separate story. Many call Novaya Zemlya a huge dump of the Soviet past, and there is some truth to that. There really are a huge number of abandoned buildings, hangars half buried in snow, rusty ships, planes, and equipment that is simply not profitable to repair or remove in the extreme north.